I want to give you a couple more examples of how styles do indeed make fights. Linear logic very often doesn't work in boxing. Just because fighter A beats fighter B and fighter B beats fighter C, it doesn't necessarily mean that fighter C can't beat fighter A. So I've given one example many times, and that is with Muhammad Ali in the 1970s. He lost to Joe Frazier right there and Ken Norton right there. And Joe Frazier and Ken Norton were subsequently wiped out in 2 rounds, both of them, by George Foreman. So linear logic would dictate that if these 2 guys beat Ali and they were both wiped out in 2 rounds by George Foreman, then surely George Foreman is going to do a similar job on Ali and wipe him out too. But that's not what happened, of course, because Ali knocked out George Foreman in 8 rounds. So that's a classic example of how styles make fights and linear logic often doesn't work in boxing. Sometimes it works, but when you're talking about the elite level, the top level, it very often doesn't work. Another example would be Roberto Duran. So he was one of the greatest lightweights of all time and just a great fighter in general. But he did get beaten decisively a few times, and one of those times was against Tommy Hearns in 1984. At light middleweight, he was knocked out in just 2 rounds, destroyed by Tommy Hearns. The guy just walked through him, down in the first round and laid out in the second round. Now, Tommy Hearns would go on to fight Iran Barkley. Just find the fight here. Where's the first Barkley fight? Okay, here it is. So Tommy Hearns went on to fight Iran Barkley. Iran Barkley knocked him out in 3 rounds. Later on in his career, he would lose to Iran Barkley again on a decision. But in '88, he lost to Barkley in 3 rounds. So linear logic would dictate that since Tommy Hearns destroyed Duran and Barkley knocked out Tommy Hearns, Barkley should be able to beat Duran as well, right? Linear logic. Especially given the fact that Barkley was a huge middleweight, 6'1", big puncher. I mean, he finished up his career at heavyweight, just to give you an indication of how big Iran Barkley was. Roberto Duran was really a blown-up lightweight. So again, linear logic would have you believe that Iran Barkley should be able to deal with Roberto Duran easy. But that's not what happened, because Roberto Duran fought Iran Barkley in a remarkable fight for the middleweight title, and Roberto Duran beat him. Roberto Duran beat Iran Barkley. He jumped up to middleweight again. Well, his weight was all over the place, to be fair, Roberto Duran. But he was at his best, really, at lightweight. Jumps up to middleweight, and he's way, way up there in age by this time. Roberto Duran must have been 36, 37 by the time he fought Iran Barkley. And as I say, Barkley, a huge middleweight. Duran goes in there and beats him. So linear logic didn't work there, did it? Duran was supposed to lose. This old guy, blown up lightweight, going in there against the guy who'd knocked out someone in Tommy Hearns who'd wiped him out in 2 rounds. He was supposed to lose the fight. He went in there and won it. Another example of how linear logic often doesn't work in boxing at the top level, of how styles really do make fights, would be Shane Mosley. So Shane Mosley at one stage of his career was regarded as the best fighter pound for pound in all the boxing publications and what have you. But then he fought a guy called Vernon Forrest, rest in peace. Forrest ended up schooling Shane Mosley over 12 rounds. That was a big shock at the time, what Vernon Forrest did to Shane Mosley. They had the rematch later the same year. Same thing again. I mean, it was a closer fight, but Vernon Forrest still won clearly. Vernon Forrest then ended up fighting a guy called Ricardo Mayorga, crazy Nicaraguan. Nobody had heard of Mayorga prior to this. I certainly hadn't heard of him before. Mayorga comes in and steamrolls Vernon Forrest. Steamrolls him. I mean, this guy was a cigarette smoking, rum drinking, foul-mouthed Nicaraguan tough guy who was always talking about his street fights and what have you. Had very little boxing technique, could just come out swinging and trying to bulldoze opponents. And he managed to take out Vernon Forrest, who was a very, very, slick and well-schooled boxer. big tall guy for the weight. Mayorga just came in and steamrolled him. They rematched later on the same year. Mayorga beat him again. So linear logic would dictate that if Vernon Forrest schooled Shane Mosley and then Ricardo Mayorga beat Vernon Forrest, well then Ricardo Mayorga must also be able to beat Shane Mosley, right? That's linear logic. But of course, that's not what happened. Because when he did fight Shane Mosley, fought him a couple times, well, you see what happened there. Knocked out in the 12th, knocked out in the 6th. Linear logic very often doesn't work at the top level in boxing. Styles make fights, which is why it's so important that we put pressure on fighters to fight a variety of opponents. Not just stick with one particular opponent and have them rematching him over and over again. For example, like with Pacquiao and Marquez. You know how many times Bob Arum tried to sell us that fight over and over? Yeah, sometimes trilogies and what have you can be good at the right time. But sometimes it's a case of fighters understanding that if they go out there and take on all comers, they're going to stand a much greater chance of losing. So they'll stick to what they know. You know, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. But for us fans, we're really being, done a disservice when fighters do stuff like that. So we need to put pressure on fighters to fight a variety of different contenders. That's how you get the most entertainment, a variety of different styles. And let's not buy into the myth, because I've learned over the years the hard way about this myth. Let's not buy into the myth of the invincible fighter. There's no such thing. I've done a separate video about it where I got burned several times in the 1990s and early 2000s believing in certain fighters, thinking they were invincible. Because that's what the press was saying about certain fighters, like Mike Tyson and Roy Jones in his prime. The press was saying they were invincible. Me as a young boxing fan, looking at the stuff they were doing in the ring, how they were dominating, good fighters in the case of Mike Tyson and great fighters in the case of Roy Jones. Jones was dominating people like Bernard Hopkins, James Toney, Mike McCallum, Virgil Hill. Mike Tyson, beating good fighters that are around during his day. So when the pair of them lost after being so dominant, it was a massive shock. I thought that they were invincible. Roy Jones was called Superman at the time. He was the Superman before Adonis Stevenson. It turned my boxing world upside down. And it took 4 of those major upsets. Tyson being knocked out by Douglas, Tyson being stopped by Holyfield, and, I want to say 4, 3 really. Roy Jones getting knocked out by Antonio Tarver. Those occasions right there just shocked me to my boots. Shook me to my boot. I couldn't believe it. But it was particularly after Jones was knocked out by Tarver in 2 rounds. That was the last time that I ever bought into this myth that a fighter was invincible. So let's not buy into their myths, people. Because once you buy into that myth, people can start making the argument, he doesn't need to go and fight that contender. That's not going to be competitive. Yeah, I don't care if he's got a style that he's never faced before, but he's obviously going to beat him. We can't allow ourselves to fall into that trap. We must demand that fighters face all the top contenders out there if they're champions. Let's fight all the top contenders, man. A variety of different styles and abilities, different type of personalities and characters. So we can actually see who the best really is, rather than allowing people to cherry pick their way through their career, picking styles that suit them and avoiding styles that don't. We can't allow champions to get away with that. Styles make fights. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. It's happening, I'm out. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.